Hello. I'm just going to do a bit of a recap from the preach on Sunday and then throw out some discussion questions for you to chat about in your life groups. So I was speaking on 1 Corinthians 3:18 down to chapter 4 verse 13. You might want to read it again together, maybe split it between you. Basically the passage was all about how the Corinthians' view of leaders had become a bit more worldly. And they'd start to put leaders up on pedestals and were idolizing them a bit, trying to get sort of status and a sense of importance from who they followed. And there was kind of disunity between them, arguing and squabbling over who they followed and the status that they got from that. And so Paul's in this passage trying to show how their view of leaders has become worldly, but also then show them how leaders should really be viewed. And he uses them and points them to Jesus, who models a completely different way, an opposite way of the world. And so I had 4 points: all his grace, just servants, an audience of one, and greatness redefined. And so the first point was really all about how that everything that we have is a gift of grace. There's no reason to boast, whether it's about human leaders or it's about other areas of our lives. Everything we've been given, whether it's the cross, the Holy Spirit, our talents, our money, our gifts, they're all gracious gifts of the Father. And so if God's given us everything, how can we boast as though it's somehow ours by right? Then we looked at how Paul says they should be, the apostles, the church leaders should be viewed. And he says in verse 1 of chapter 4, we should be viewed as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. And I was talking about how this word for servant means like an under-rower on a big galley ship. And they're kind of like just the trustees, really, of the gospel. Jesus is the leader, he's the pilot of the ship. And they're just there trying to sort of row and push the church forwards, the ship of the church forwards. Basically that what matters in leadership is not this fame and this kind of prestige and in being impressive as a leader. That's not important, but what matters in leadership is faithfulness. These stewards and servants had to be faithful in what they were managing, and in a similar way the leaders, the apostles, had to be faithful with the gospel in preaching it faithfully and stewarding it diligently. And so it's not about charisma, likability, skill. It's about being faithful with what God has given us, however little or however large. And then thirdly, audience of one. So I told a silly story about Britain's Got Talent. You can recap that. And Paul basically is saying he's not bothered about how the Corinthians view him. There'd been mixed reports, they'd kind of turned their backs on him a little bit in favour of other leaders like Apollos and Peter. But he tells them that he's not bothered. Their opinions, however high or low, their judgments were irrelevant, really. He says that they're a very small thing. And I was talking about how that's really amazing, because quite often in our own lives, other people's opinions and judgments are not a small thing. They're actually quite big, aren't they? How I look, how I come across, how I dress, if you said the right thing. But he was just reminding us about how God is the only judge, and ultimately it's God who judges, not the world. And within that, God's looking at our hearts, he's looking at our motives, not all the externals, not all the shiny, rosy things on the outside, but what's behind our hearts and what's in our motives behind what we're doing and how we're serving. And there's a real freedom that brings, knowing that God is the only judge. We can rest in his final assessment. We don't need to perform, the pressure is off.